A Science of Change, podcasting by Gilmore Crosby, social scientist, author, and organization development professional since 1984. Welcome to another episode of A Scientific Method of Change. And that is the focus of this episode, the social science of Kurt Lewin, which is the best framework for organization development and even social change today, in my humble opinion. So many OD people think of Lewin as like a historical figure that they give some respect to, but they have been led to believe in recent times by many of the most successful current OD practitioners and academians that in our new, more complex world, we have to have new models, and that the models of the past are no longer relevant. And I think that's basically a bunch of hype. Not only is it hype for the new methods that are being championed, is for the purpose, of course, of making money by the people who are championing them, but also, and which is fine. I mean, we all need to make money. I think it's important when you're making money, though, to do it with integrity. And so when some of these practitioners say things like, here's the old way, and then they describe it, and it's not actually anything that Lewin would have done, then that's questionable in my mind. So I want at least accuracy about the methods, and then you can decide whether or not to use them. I've been using them since 1984, as has my father before me since 1953. And they almost always lead to the desired business results, individual change. And so I am ready once again to tell you about the social science of Kurt Lewin. So I'm using an article, as I have in past podcasts, used a couple books to organize my thinking here, and I'm literally going to read to you from the article and then make comments about it as I go. This was an article I had published in 2022 in the Organization Development Review, A Scientific Method of Change. Lewin in a nutshell for business leaders and organization development practitioners. The abstract is that the thesis of this paper is that none of what has been written about change stands up to the test of time like Kurt Lewin's social science, and far too many who lead and facilitate change do not know his basic theories and methods. The following is an attempt to simplify his systemic approach to change based on a careful study of his materials, on the author's work as an OD practitioner, and on the author's father's OD career. And so off we go. Much like the physicists of his time, Kurt Lewin, who was born in 1890 and lived a short life, only till 1947, died when he was 57, sought a social science that could explain and be applied to both universal concept and individual event. That's a Lewin quote, that universal concept part. So just like in physics, they've been searching for a theory that'll explain everything. Lewin wanted the same for social science. His theory and methods are applicable to understanding and addressing any contemporary social phenomenon, whether new, such as the pandemic, or persistent, such as racism. His social science applies both within and outside of organizations. Lewin addressed conflict and productivity in manufacturing, racial tension in various shapes and forms, individual psychology, and cultural change on a national level, the reconstruction of Germany. He was a heavy influence on the State Department and an active support of the U.S. government throughout the 40s until his death in 47. And he wrote several papers about the reconstruction of Germany and how to go about it. The following is a bare-bones description of his approach, divided into 5 sections, which need to be understood as a whole. Which element should come first is ambiguous as the chicken and the egg. So the 5 sections are the 3 Ds of Lewinian change: group dynamics, dialogue, and group decision. Number 2, training action research. Number 3, the social construction of reality. That's one of my favorites. Number 4, field theory and change as 3 steps. This is one of the only things many people have heard of, but most don't understand what it means. And number 5, democratic style of leadership, which is very relevant to our current politics. The 3 Ds of Lewinian change: group dynamics, dialogue, and group decision. The group's the thing at the heart of Lewinian change. As Lewin put it, quote, "It is easier to change ideology or cultural habits by dealing with groups than with individuals." That's from the American Psychiatric Association's, American Psychological Association, pardon me, 1999 anthology of Lewinian papers on page 289. And that's the end of the quote. Lewin demonstrated with statistical research methods conveyed through visual graphics, time and again, that attempts to change individuals through lecture and other means, even if the individual was listening in a group setting, was far less likely to lead to sustained change than attempts based on group interaction. And so he worked with group after group after group to demonstrate and test these theories, and his results were consistent. That if you use traditional methods like lecturing, people will likely hold on to the beliefs they had prior to the lecture, whereas if you allow people to have dialogue, that leads to the most likely path towards change, towards people reconsidering their own beliefs and possibly shifting. Now, you might have heard me walk away and come back. That's because I went to my library and I grabbed The Complete Social Scientist. The Complete Social Scientist. That's the name of the book on page 289 where that quote came from. It's a wonderful anthology of Lewin writing, and the American Psychological Association also pulled together another collection in 1997, so the first collection called Resolving Social Conflicts and Field Theory in Social Science. So if you have not read those, and you want to be an OD practitioner, or you want to be an influence on the field, go stand in the corner and immediately go out to a bookstore and find them or order them, because if you have to read this stuff to really appreciate it. And I only found that out a few years ago myself, so I'm still periodically standing in the corner. Okay, so Lewin demonstrated with statistical research methods conveyed through visual graphics in these books that I just mentioned, that individual passive learning is far less likely to have an impact than group interaction. Using control groups in his research, if a group was lectured at even by an effective instructor, the individuals in the group were very unlikely to change behaviors or to sustain what changes they did attempt. When, on the other hand, a group was given the same information, but then allowed to talk amongst themselves, the rate of change and the length of sustaining change rose dramatically. Lewin concluded that peer influence through dialogue generates unique and sensible solutions, as well as positive peer pressure to take action and stick with it. Commitment rises because of increased attachment to what one has been able to influence, because of increased quality if the people actually facing the challenge are able to come up with or alter the solutions, and perhaps most importantly, because of the emotional ties of group membership. That is clear to me because I have been practicing the same principles in organizations, again, since 1984. As a matter of fact, I'm coming up on my 40th anniversary, and I still, actually, my interventions are even simpler now than they used to be. I'll get with an intact work team, and I'll have them think about what's working and what isn't working, and they will come up with their own solutions and implement them. And some of that requires them trying to influence up the chain of command, and some of it requires them talking to other groups. And it is just too simple. If you actually engage the people who are doing the physical work, they are dying for that almost everywhere. They constantly are being experimented on by for one, consultants, but also by management, and who are buying stuff from consultants, who come in and say, okay, this will all work better if you no longer call your boss or supervisor. From now on, we'll call them facilitator. And they're going to now manage 60 people instead of 20, but that's okay because you're going to be more self-managed. And, we don't need quite so many engineers, etc. They come in and say all this stuff and impose it, and then generally the system falls apart. And they say, well, that's because you didn't implement it right. And so I go in and say, well, what do you guys think is in the way? And half of what's in the way is the old stuff that they were told to do by some person, some expert. And so they'll bag that. And then the other half, they just need to get parts, for instance. They need, they've got to fight to get parts, and they usually don't have them when they need them. Well, that can be fixed. And if you're shutting down production because you don't have the right parts, then you're penny wise and pound foolish. And that's where a lot of organizations have gone in their attempt to be lean. Crappy implementation of lean systems that, came out of Toyota. Toyota would never shut down production because they didn't have enough parts. That they would, roll their eyes at that. That's not lean. Lean should be that you have what you need when you need it. And that might mean you have to have some extras, some spares, so that you make money even if you have to spend a little extra money. So there you go. I've digressed. And so back to the first of the 5. So allowing the people who are actually facing the problem to dialogue with some structure and come up with solutions and experiment with implementing them, which they will do wholeheartedly because they came up with them. They'll do what they can to make it work. There's your motivation that everybody's looking for and wondering why it's not there. Well, maybe it's because nobody ever lets the workers think. Or when they do, it's just allowed to be a bitch session and it's not organized into action. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. There's a movie where that's a famous line, but you have to be, probably younger than 40 to remember it. Okay, but anyway, back to, so this is what Lewin referred to as group decision. The term does not mean a vote or a formal decision-making process, although either might occur, but rather the influence on the individual if the group they belong to changes direction in a collaborative way, a dialogue way. This is where dialogic comes from, at least should come from, is from Lewinian OD. It was very dialogue-based. So, quote, experience in leadership training and changing of food habits, work production, criminality, alcoholism, prejudices, all seem to indicate that it is usually easier to change individuals formed into a group than to change any one of them separately. As long as group values are unchanged, the individual will resist changes more strongly the further he is to depart from group standards. If the group standard itself is changed, the resistance which is due to the relation between individual and group standard is eliminated. Lewin, 1997, the one I already mentioned to you. Page 289. No, page 329. In other words, if the group is stuck on, like, let's say, just blaming management and feeling frustrated, it's hard as an individual to not just be caught in that same behavior and belief system. But if the group starts to think about their relationship with the rest of the organization differently and to take action to improve it, it's hard not to be part of that. If all your peers are trying to be part of it. So the group dynamics is where the leverage lies, my friend. Furthermore, says Lewin, quote, group decision provides a background of motivation where the individual is ready to cooperate as a member of the group more or less independent of his personal inclinations. 1999, 289. So I might even do something I wouldn't normally think or be inclined to do if the members of my group are influencing me to do it, if they're doing it, for better or worse. As a teenager, I might be inclined to, follow my friends over a cliff like a bunch of lemmings because of peer pressure. And in Lewinian theory, we're trying to apply positive peer pressure to overcome negative peer pressure, which has probably become into place, stuck, frozen, you might say, homeostasis in any system where there's like mistrust between management and labor. This works so well. It's just astounding to me that more people aren't experimenting with it in their organizations and elsewhere. In other words, allow a group such as an intact work group, supervisor and direct reports, or any group facing any challenge to have open dialogue about the challenge, come up with their own solutions, implement, and assess their own progress. That's research. And you will have a strong chance of successful and sustainable change. Add some of the other elements of Lewinian methodology, and it is unlikely you will fail. Training action research, that's the second element here. Although shortened by many into action research, Lewin described his approach as action, research, and training as a triangle. That's 1997, page 149, for those of you who want to look things up. Lewin and or his associates began the training as soon as they walked in the door. He trained everyone involved, from group members, gang members, to CEOs, in how to think like a social scientist. Interviews were not so much to gather data, but rather to establish rapport and begin to influence thinking. As a Lewin associate put it, quote, this attempt to change perception by an action interview, as distinguished from a mere fact-finding interview, is one of the basic elements of treatment. By reorientating perception from the field of personal emotional relationship to the same field of objective facts, The life spaces which guide the action of these persons have become more similar, although the persons themselves are not yet aware of this similarity. Lewin, 1997, page 97. In other words, from the beginning of his entry or his associate's entry into the organization, he is beginning to influence how people think. And that I do the exact same thing. I'm in there both to establish rapport. I'm not there to write down a whole bunch of notes about people gossiping and blaming. I'm there to establish rapport and help them start to think differently about how they approach and experience and influence the organization that they're in, each person. In Lewin's mind, the first task of the change agent is to join. Quote, in spite of whatever status differences there might be between them, the teacher and the student have to feel as members of one group in matters involving their sense of values. The chances for re-education seem to increase whenever a strong we feeling is created. 1997, page 55. Now, these are, quotes from a plethora of articles. So you should grab those things, man. They're really good books. They have all the articles. Not all the articles, but many of them. This guy wrote a lot. For Lewin, the we feeling was created through genuine humility and recognition of our common humanity, as well as through the collaborative application of social science to address whatever challenges the particular group faced. Humility is really important. The ability to empathize with the people that you're working with at all levels is vital to effective OD. If I think I'm better than them, then that's going to get in the way. It's just going to get in the way. If I think I know more than them about what they're dealing with, then that's going to get in the way. As Lewin put it, the change agent can bring and transfer social science expertise. But for successful change, quote, the laws of social science don't do the job of diagnosis, which has to be done locally. Neither do laws prescribe the strategy for change. Lewin, 1997, page 150. The people facing the problems have to do the diagnosis, and yes, diagnosis is part of OD, even dialogic OD. The people there are talking about what's going on and what to do about it. That's a diagnosis. An expert can teach and facilitate methods such as group dialogue and decision, but the people facing the challenges must still be the ones who have the dialogue and come up with the solutions. Quote, it can be surmised that the extent to which social research is translated into social action depends on the degree to which those who carry out this action are made a part of the fact-finding on which the action is to be based. Lewin, 1997, page 55. If you're trying to change the organization and the people in the organization aren't part of figuring out what to do, how to change it, then you're missing the boat. You're already creating the conditions for failure, in my humble opinion. This doesn't mean that they get interviewed or do a long study. This means that the people, whether a group of janitors or a group of scientists, actually do the thinking, come up with the solutions, implement the change, monitor their own progress, and know how to repeat the cycle into the future. Just get that with emphasis. Diagnosis doesn't mean interviews or a long study. When I work with work groups, the day I meet them, they are already doing diagnosis, they are already coming up with actions, and they begin implementing them. Same day. The author's father's OD practice was built on this model. True. Robert P. Crosby, my dad. When the author joined him in 1984, one of his first assignments was facilitating every intact team in 2 tomato processing factories in group dialogue, solution generation, and implementation. With a facilitator who had no experience and nothing but a sound process and a clear mentor, every group in both plants were soon doing their own training, action, and research, and the plant metrics quickly and dramatically improved. These were hourly workers and supervisors with high school educations at the most, seizing the opportunity to influence their work. The same basic methods have been effective for the author ever since. Okay, item 3, the social construction of reality. Woohoo! Social or work culture change almost certainly requires changing beliefs and values. Lewin asserts that reality in terms of beliefs, values, and behaviors is socially constructed. In my own OD interventions, a key element of any change effort is shifting from patterns such as blame and defensiveness, which fuel each other, towards owning misunderstandings and taking responsibility for one's own reactions and emotions. In other words, shifting each group towards a different way of thinking and interacting. That is possible, but it is only possible because thinking is socially constructed rather than determined in some other way that is fixed and unalterable. As Lewin put it, the, quote, social construction of reality, what exists as reality for the individual is, to a high degree, determined by what is socially accepted as reality. It's what we're born into. Reality, therefore, is not an absolute. It differs with the group to which the individual belongs. The general acceptance of a fact or a belief might be the very cause preventing this belief or fact from ever being questioned. Lewin, 1997, page 49. So if I believe my group is in some way superior to other groups, I got that because I grew up in it. And I may have a really hard time considering a different perspective than that. And that's true of any belief that I grew up with. And so here we go. Shifting the social reality in a way that will last, a change that Lewin called re-education, comes most reliably through a group dialogue that allows freedom of thought rather than an over-controlled process. Freedom of thought. And this is where the DEI stuff comes in. There's too many DEI workshops and books that tell you what your biases are and what you should believe, and also whether or not you're guilty of racism. And it's not a discovery process where the humble leader is helping people do their own humble explorations in dialogue and in a group. And it needs to be. It doesn't stick. People get just either ashamed and beat themselves up, but more likely they reject the message and fight back. And so that doesn't help. That doesn't help make social progress. That's why I wrote my most recent book, Diversity Without Dogma. But that's another story. There's already a podcast about it, though. You could go back and listen. Okay, so it comes to, I'm going to repeat this, the change in thinking most reliably comes through group dialogue that allows freedom of thought. You can say what you actually think rather than an over-controlled process. Quote, when re-education involves the relinquishment of standards which are contrary to the standards of society at large, as in the case of delinquency, minority prejudices, alcoholism, the feeling of group belongingness seems to be greatly heightened if the members feel free to express openly the very sentiments which are to be dislodged through re-education. People have to be able to say in the learning process something like, well, the playing field's already even, without immediately getting shut down and shamed. Okay, to continue the quote. This might be viewed as another example of the seeming contradictions inherent in the process of re-education. Expression of prejudices against minorities or the breaking of rules of parliamentary procedures may in themselves be contrary to the desired goal. Yet a feeling of complete freedom and a heightened group identification are frequently more important at a particular stage of re-education than learning not to break specific rules. Lewin, 1997, page 55. So, in other words, if you can't say what you really think, then you're just going to probably go underground and still hold on to your prior beliefs. And that may be hard for people to tolerate, but do you want change? Or do you just want to fight the beliefs that you don't like? By the way, re-education unfortunately got taken in by communist China as a term that meant brainwashing people to only, support the political party in power. But that's not what Lewin means by it. And it's in these quotes, so I'm using the same word, but I'm using it the way he intended. In other words, if all a person does is learn to hide their thoughts, to only say what is permitted by the leader or the facilitator, then they have not really changed. This is especially important when confronting a false hypothesis, such as you can't trust management, you can't trust labor, or racism, sexism, etc. Here's a Lewin quote. Re-education is frequently in danger of only reaching the official system of values, the level of verbal expression, and not of conduct. It may result in merely heightening the discrepancy between the superego, the way I ought to feel, and the ego, the way I really feel, and thus give the individual a bad conscience. Such a discrepancy leads to a state of high emotional tension, but seldom to correct conduct. It may postpone transgressions, but it is likely to make the transgressions more violent when they occur. A factor of great importance in bringing about a change in sentiment is the degree to which the individual becomes actively involved in the problem. Lacking this involvement, no objective fact is likely to reach the status of a fact for the individual concerned and therefore influence his social conduct. Lewin, 1997, page 52. If all you get is forced compliance, the tension will lead to trouble. This is me again. The individual must ultimately come to the new way of thinking on their own, and that is unlikely unless their peers are also moving in a new direction. Such change can be intended, planned, and even required, but the individual must still arrive of their own free will. By the way, along with words like re-education, Lewin wrote at a time when the language was all male, so he always says he and so on. And interestingly enough, he was inviting women into dialogue in the University of Berlin, at the University of Berlin, when there was no dialogue between the average student and the professors, including Lewin. He wanted to talk to his professors and they wouldn't let him, except a rare professor in a private meeting in their office. But you couldn't speak in class at the time, except to answer questions. So, and yet when he taught, immediately had his students talking to him, and afterwards meeting in coffee shops and continuing. And a large portion of his students were women. So he was far from sexist, but in his writing, the language at the time was sexist. Okay, 4. Field theory and change as 3 steps. So anyway, I hope you got from this last section, the social construction and reality, that, wherever you're born, like let's say you were born in Greece 500 BC, and you were a male, unlike males in most modern societies, where the act of tears has been suppressed, in ancient days, at least the ancient days I'm talking about, to be manly, you wept. openly. You wailed until you were finished grieving if you had a loss. And so that's just one example of a cultural, social construction of reality. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. People have beliefs and they teach the next generation the beliefs without even realizing a lot of what they're teaching. A lot of it's through example, for instance. And so we have all kinds of thoughts and habits that came from our environment. Of course, they don't just come from outer space. And so so we can change those thoughts. We can change them if we're aware of them and we want to. That's what Lewin was on to. With his experiments around learning. How do people learn? And in particular, how do people learn to break false hypotheses that they hold, like racism? Okay, on to number 4 here. Rolling right along. Field theory and change is 3 steps. To understand Lewin's approach to change, one could just as easily start with field theory. Lewin's theory is that every system is in a state of homeostasis or, quote, semi-quasi-equilibrium, end quote, to acknowledge that no system is 100% stable or unchanging. Held in place by driving and restraining forces, quote, change and constancy are relative concepts. Group life is never without change. Merely differences in the amount and type of change exist. Lewin, 1997, page 308. Most attempts at change involve implementing solutions, a new driving force. If a solution is imposed on a system that has restraining forces such as high mistrust and or a history of failed solutions, then the attempt to drive the new solution increases tension in the system. The restraining forces may actually gain strength and eventually erode any gains made. The Lewinian change agent focuses on unfreezing the quasi-equilibrium of mistrust and shifting the social construction of reality. They know that a new and healthier homeostasis, as measured by variables such as high performance and morale, must be built on a, quote, a change in the level of functioning, end quote, of groups through dialogue and group decision, influence on one another, and commitment to actions. Unfrozen by an effective change agent working in alignment with formal and informal leaders, the group can begin their own analysis of the field of forces within which their own performance and morale are held in stasis. The laws of physical science will guide the change. Pushing harder on the field, as many organizations do, only increases tension and strengthens the restraining forces. Sustainable change happens through group dynamics, with the restraining force of over-functioning by management and experts, quote, or in parentheses, a petri dish for under-functioning by everyone else, end of the parentheses, instantly replaced by local analysis and solution generation. So instead of having management try to do all the thinking, or experts, if you switch and have the people doing the actual work do the thinking, you've already changed one of the restraining forces. You've already reduced it. Groups take action and do research on the effectiveness of their actions. As groups identify and address their own restraining forces, change happens in the moment, and a transformation ability to adapt to new challenges and opportunities spreads through the system like electricity. That's no exaggeration. You unleash these energies. I have a friend that's very Reichian, and his whole approach to OD is to get energy flowing through the system. And I that makes a lot of sense to me. Energy gets dammed up. People aren't being listened to, and when they attempt to bring things up, they are so frustrated that it's ugly, and so then they're not listened to again after that. And the potential energy of all the aspirations of the workers to have things run better gets lost. And there's nothing more frustrating than to be in that situation and have somebody come along and try to fix it with solutions that don't make sense to you. And then they get called resistant. Okay, so here are the groups: identifying, addressing their own restraining forces. Oh yeah, it's spreading like electricity. In a flash, agility and resilience are no longer catchwords, but rather a behavior-based reality. A new homeostasis freezes the fields and replaces the old. That is Lewin's change as 3 steps, a rich systemic approach that can be applied with confidence to any situation. Don't just take the author's word for it. Read Lewin yourself, of which this is just a sample. So here's a long sample from Lewin. Changing is 3 steps. This is from the 1997 anthology, page 330. Changing is 3 steps: unfreezing, moving, and freezing of group standards. A change toward a higher level of group performance is frequently short-lived. After a shot in the arm, group life soon returns to the previous level. This indicates that it does not suffice to define the objective of a planned change in group performance as the reaching of a different level. Permanency of the new level, or permanency for a desired period, should be included in the objective. A successful change includes therefore 3 aspects: unfreezing, if necessary, the present level, moving to the new level, and freezing group life on the new level. Since any level is determined by a force field, permanency implies that the new force field is made relatively secure against change. So, in other words, if you now have people in every work group in your organization thinking about what's getting in the way of getting the work done and coming up with solutions on a continuous basis, you've frozen that behavior at a new level. And you're going to keep getting performance out of it. Back to Lewin's quote. The unfreezing of the present level may involve quite different problems in different cases. Alport has described the catharsis which seems to be necessary before prejudices can be removed. To break open the shell of complacency and self-righteousness, it is sometimes necessary to bring about deliberately an emotional stir-up. The same holds for the problem of freezing the new level. Sometimes it is possible to establish an organizational setup which is equivalent to a stable circular causal process. Critics of Lewin, so that's the end of the Lewin quote. And by the way, he had in his mind the whole act, check, plan, cycle that heavily influenced lean manufacturing. Critics of Lewin have said this model of change as 3 steps, dubbed CATS by some, Lewin never called it that, is too simple. It's easy to counter such criticism at a number of levels. The first and foremost being that the same could be said of the simplification of any phenomenon. Simplification in the right dose is very helpful. What is a model, after all, except simplification? As Lewin himself put it, quote, "There's nothing so practical as a good theory." End quote. That's in 1999, Lewin, 1999, page 336. Simplifying the process does not mean change itself is simple. Lewin was well aware that change is complicated and full of setbacks and surprises, many of which emerge along the way. Somewhere, quote, "somewhere along the road, I am sure we will have to face major crisis. I have observed this type of development in many research undertakings, and we will have to be unusually lucky if this time we avoid it. To my mind, the difference between success and defeat in such undertakings depends mainly upon the willingness and the guts to pull through such periods. It seems to me decisive that one knows that such developments are the rule, and that one holds up a team that is able to pull through." That's in his autobiography by Morrow, on page 176. Despite such complications, when Lewin's field theory is applied by groups, it leads to a rapid culture change, problem solving, and implementation of solutions. In the author's own practice, the significant portion of all that happens in the first day with a group. There is minimal diagnosis or gathering of data, maximum integration of thinking and doing, with deeper dives as needed. Once the basic process is transferred, groups can apply dialogue and field theory to any challenges which arise, making them truly nimble and resilient. As per Lewin's intentions, to a large extent, outside expertise becomes no longer required. Except you might need technical expertise, like someone who really knows how to work on a certain type of engine, for instance. 5. The final element here. Democratic style of leadership. Last but not least, Lewin held a clear-eyed vision of the influence of leadership on groups and on the change process, forged by his experience as a Jewish male growing up in Germany during the pre-Nazi years and during Hitler's rise to power. His social science addresses the impact of the environment on the individual when there is a power imbalance, such as racism or sexism. Both the powerful and the powerless are caught in the web, or field of forces, with fear and anxiety heightened by the inherently unjust nature of social inequality. Lewin's well-known formula, B equals F, PE, speaks to the influence the environment has on us all, with the behavior, that's B, of minority or powerless individuals likely to include hypervigilance for real and perceived slights and threats, and hyperdefensiveness by those in power. Each personality, that's P in this formula, adds variation of response, but in an environment, that's E in the formula, B equals the function of personality times the environment. Personality and the environment. But an environment of systemic inequality has a predictable, pervasive, and damaging influence on behavior. And we're living in it. Imagine how much more harmonious relations would be in a world of social and economic equality. As Lewin put it, quote, "The solution, I think, can be found only through a development which would bring the general level of group esteem and group loyalty, which in themselves are perfectly natural and necessary phenomena, to the same level for all groups of society. That means every effort should be made to lower the inflated self-esteem of the 100%ers, the majority. And in Lewin's model, the majority means the people in power, the group in power. The minority means having less power. And even if you are actually the larger portion of the population, such as the Jewish population in Rome, in the Holy Land during the time of Jesus, which was occupied by Rome. There were far more Jewish than there were Romans, but the Jews in this case, in this model, would be considered the minority, the powerless. So, they should learn, this is back to Lewin's quote, so you have to lower the inflated self-esteem of the people in power. They should learn the prayer from the musical play Oklahoma. Dear God, make me see that I am not better than my fellow men. However, it is essential to learn the second half of this prayer that goes something like, but that I am every darned bit as good as he. Lewin, 1997, page 151. The dilemmas of power did not lead Lewin, however, to believe that power must be eliminated from human affairs, as some OD voices advocate. Instead, he studied what style of power fosters performance and morale and what diminishes it. One point should be seen clearly and strongly. There is no individual, this is a quote, there's no individual who does not, consciously or unconsciously, try to influence his family, his group friends, his occupational group, and so on. Management is, after all, a legitimate and one of the most important functions in every aspect of social life. Few aspects are as much befogged in the minds of many as the problems of leadership and of power. We have to realize that power itself is an essential aspect of any and every group. Not the least service which social research can do for society is to attain better insight into the legitimate and non-legitimate aspects of power. That's from his autobiography, Lewin's, 1969, page 172. written by Morrow. Every OD person is trying to influence, even if they are advocating for, quote, an emergent, end quote, or, quote, self-organizing, end quote, system. You're still trying to influence, whether you like it or not, whether you think people should or not. The question is not whether influencing is legitimate, but rather how to effectively influence, whether in a formal position of authority or as a change agent. True to form, Lewin researched his hypothesis about power. For several consecutive years at the University of Iowa, he studied groups of kids led by adults using 3 different styles of leadership, and then he repeatedly tested the effective style of leadership on groups of adults in industrial settings. He concluded that a blend of leadership and freedom, which had to be adjusted depending on group and individual needs, such as new versus experienced workers, brought about consistently high productivity and morale. Who wants that? Because it is based on clarity about who is in charge mixed with respect and engagement of all, he called the target style democratic. According to Lewin, quote, these groups showed very striking differences during periods when the leader left. Whereas the work morale of the Democratic group was sustained at a high level, that of the autocratic group fell rapidly. In a short time, the latter group ceased entirely to produce. The organization of work, like any other aspect of the organization of the autocratic group, is based on the leader. It is he who determines the policy of the group. It is he who sets the specific goals of action for the members within the group. That means that the goals of the individual as well as his action as a group member are induced by the leader. It's the leader's power field which keeps the individual going, which determines his work morale, and which makes the group an organized unit. In the Democratic group, on the contrary, every member has had a hand in determining the policy of the group. Every member has helped to lay out the plans. As a result, each is more we-centered and less ego-centered than the member of the autocratic group. Because the group goes ahead under its own steam, its work morale does not flag as soon as the power field of the leader is eliminated. In the Democratic group, acceptance of the group goal by the member means taking it over and making it one's own goal. The readiness to do so, in the latter case, is partly based on the time perspective of the individual in the past. That is, he himself has participated in setting up that goal, and now he feels his individual responsibility in carrying it through. That's Lewin, 1997, page 88. There's a lot in there. But a big chunk of it is that the people, for one, when he says, even when the Democratic leader is eliminated, what he means is for a brief period of time. So in his research, he would have the leader of the group just get up and leave the room. And in the Democratic groups, the groups that were being run with the Democratic style of leadership, where people had high influence over the work, they would just keep working. Whereas where there was a more authoritarian style of leadership, where they were totally dependent on the leader to tell them what to do, when to do it, how to do it, when the leader left the room, the workers would stop working and start fighting with each other. There was a high tension. There was also laissez-faire. That's coming up here. The Democratic leader allows group members as much influence and freedom as possible within a structure of role and goal clarity. The Democratic leader does not overfunctioning by taking on all decision-making power, nor do they underfunctioning by being too passive, or laissez-faire, as Lewin put it. He described these 3 styles, one functional, the other 2 dysfunctional, this way, quote, autocracy, democracy, and laissez-faire should be perceived as a triangle. In many respects, autocracy and democracy are similar. They both mean leadership, as against the lack of leadership of laissez-faire. They both mean discipline and organization, as against chaos. Along other lines of comparison, democracy and laissez-faire are similar. They both give freedom to the group members insofar as they create a situation where the members are acting on their own motivation rather than being moved by forces induced by an authority in which they have no part. Lewin, 1999, page 286. So the democratic style of leadership balances and incorporates both the structure and the freedom of the other two styles. The problem with the other two styles is it's just structure in the authoritarian style, and it's just freedom in the laissez-faire style, and neither one are productive, and both cause tension. When the laissez-faire style leader left the room in Lewin's studies, the laissez-faire group also stopped working and started bickering, just like the authoritarian group. There is also tension that comes from not knowing what to do and having too much freedom. Okay, the democratic style then is the only corner of the triangle that combines leadership and freedom, creating group dynamics that freeze high performance and morale into place. And again, I was, being sarcastic earlier when I said, who wants that? High performance and morale. It's what everyone wants, is that both the spirit of the people is released into energy and satisfaction, and that you're getting things done. Whatever it is you're trying to do, you're getting it done. Okay, there's a drawing in this paper, and it basically shows the three styles as a triangle. The Lewinian leader applies democratic principles to intentionally influence the culture they are creating. This isn't passive. You aren't saying, well, it's okay, whatever happens. You're trying to create high performance and high morale. Leveraging group dynamics that balance freedom and structure in an ever-changing quasi-equilibrium. The change agent uses the same approach. Leaders lead and followers follow. And everyone knows how to do both as situations demand. Dialogue becomes rich and real with no need to restrain people from exploring what they really think. Appreciation, pessimism, fear, and the full range of relevant thoughts and feelings are explored. Lewin's methods result in fast and sustainable change, yet paradoxically require patience when addressing false hypotheses such as racism, sexism, and any other us and them, such as management and labor, maintenance and production, headquarters and locations, etc. Such mentalities only shift in the face of real dialogue. The leader using Lewin's democratic style leads towards more constructive thinking, but each must freely arrive. Once peers begin to shift from blame to respect and from fear to openness, a wave of freely chosen re-education takes place. Lewin's leadership model and change methods aren't rocket science. Wielding a triangle of training, action, research, it can be transferred to anyone who cares. It is designed in its very essence to be shared. With a little effort, you can learn it and transfer it to others. Conclusion. So there it is, Lewinian leadership and change in a nutshell. Provide structures so that the people facing the challenge have the freedom to think for themselves in a dialogue that generates and supports implementation of their own solutions. The author's quest is to help the majority of organization development professionals, as many business leaders as possible, and concerned citizens. Much of Lewin's training, action, and research was focused on social justice, to at least understand the methods and potential of Lewin's planned change. We are all deluged with hype about new methods, new cells, new challenges, and the need to improve OD. I've even been taught that in my marketing. Stick the word new on there. While Lewin himself was highly experimental and would welcome the same, the idea that our foundation is outdated is flawed. The author will gladly accept any invitation to compare and debate Lewin's scientific method of change against any other model. And that invitation stands. I'd love to be in some debates with current thinkers and people that have come up with what they think is a new way. That would be fun. As the song says, I know if I'll only be true to this glorious quest, that my heart will lie peaceful and calm when I'm laid to my rest, and the world will be better for this. That one Lewin, as Lewin himself believed, if sound social science is adapted widely, humanity can move away from sociological black holes such as totalitarianism and laissez-faire leadership, and no longer tolerate power inequality such as racism and sexism. A golden age of democratic values and leadership taking many forms, but always rooted in equality, can dawn in workplaces and everywhere. And that, my friends, is the conclusion of this podcast. Comments, questions, call me and I'll help you design your own Lewinian change efforts free of charge. Happy to talk to anybody. I want to spread Lewin during the time I have left on this earth. Take care. Hey, I appreciate you listening. This, again, is Gil Crosby. And I want you to take advantage of what's available to you. I have many free materials. I am happy to talk to people about their situations, especially if you're trying to create change, either social change or organization change. We have frequent workshops that are available, T group workshops. If you have never been in a T group with us, then don't miss it in your life. It's many people have said to me, of all the trainings I've ever received, I got this one 30 years ago, and it's the only one that stuck with me. You're learning from your actual interactions with the other participants and with the faculty. The faculty are walking the same talk that they're teaching of behavioral skills. It's a training workshop. That's what the T stands for. This is done in the spirit of the creation of T groups by Kurt Lewin and his associates. It's for groups. It's for teams. That's how it was originally designed. It is a opportunity to learn about theory and put it directly into practice. Again, the original design, you learn things and then you put them into practice. It was not just all ambiguity, which is how some T groups, most are led today, where the faculty hardly says anything. That's not how this is designed. So join us for that. There's always workshops. There's the Leadership Institute of Seattle, which has certificate programs, a two-year program where you will learn from T groups and learn how to do all the organization development work that my father designed, most of it, and I continue that practice alongside my brother Chris and many other associates. So don't be a stranger. There's a lot going on. It's always changing. So be in touch, and it's on the website, crosbyod.com. I look forward to working with you in your organization or as you pursue things like reducing gun violence and decreasing racism in our society. Whatever your goals are, the social science of Kurt Lewin guides how to achieve those goals in a reliable way. And so that's what I apply and practice every day and invite you to.